Great.
Thanks a lot for doing this with me. I really
Okay.
appreciate it. I was wondering if you could possibly start with sort of giving a brief overview of what people could expect at the workshop.
The intention is to provide people with an accessible introduction to this area of non-verbal communication, and I think it's such a big subject. So to do it any justice, we're going to devote a full day to the program and really explore some of the definitions, what we mean by non-verbal communication, what it encompasses. And I think as well, there's a lot of pop psychology around body language and non-verbal communication. So what we're going to do is we're going to test the validity of many of the commonly held assumptions about it. So whether or not this means you're being defensive, or there's all sorts of things about, scratching your head at certain times, what that means. And we're going to go into really some of the science and some of the research that's come out, particularly around the last few years, which challenges, I think, many of these commonly held assumptions.
That sounds very interesting, and that was something that I took away from because I read a post about the workshop, and I immediately thought, oh, that sounds really interesting. I mean, I'd love to know when people are, not being completely true with you, that kind of thing. And then I was sort of wondering, are there any other, and you sort of touched on it there. So, are there uses for sort of understanding non-verbal communication, sort of outside of that? Is there other ways that you can apply an understanding of that?
Yeah, great question, David. There's a lot of different statistics bandied about the significance of non-verbal communication and how much it contributes to any message interpersonally that's being relayed. So we share some of that research and also then help people refine and support the messages they give. And I think the key thing is for a message to feel authentic and for people to be able to maximize their interpersonal impact, it's about matching what's being said with the way that it's being said.
Right.
So is there congruence? And that's critical these days. So if, for example, I'm saying I'm really pleased to be here, but my body language is betraying the fact that I'm actually quite apprehensive and maybe a little bit nervous about it.
Yeah.
You get a disconnect. And I think people who are really good at reading the behavior of others often unknowingly pick up on disconnect. And so they'll say something around the guy that delivered the parcel at the door today, and I just wasn't convinced of their intentions. And people used to call this sixth sense, almost like, some people have got this ability to read into someone else's mind. And personally, I don't think there is sixth sense. And a lot of my background is occupational psychology.
Yeah.
And I'd love to think that there was something as elusive as, sort of sixth sense. But I think what actually is the case, that some people are just more effective at picking up on the unspoken feelings and emotions of others.
Yeah.
What we tend to see is people who are good at that, whether they're trained and they're developed and practiced in that art, or they've just got an innate ability around it, seem to be better at reading body language.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, and it's sort of in a way, especially with that example that you gave about the person delivering the package. I mean, it has its uses in everyday life, as you say. But also, it made me think of in police interviews, or when people, if you're trying to figure out when someone's lying, it can be quite, it can be quite important, in certain scenarios, and you could potentially avoid danger or that kind of thing, just from understanding sort of what a person's intentions is, I see, rather than, they might be saying one thing, but they're looking at a complete different thing. So just sort of moving on from that, you were saying about people that are good at that. And what sort of skills do you think that people that are able to sort of pick up on that body language, what sort of skills do you think that they have that might allow them to do that?
Well, what we've found recently is that there's an overlap between people who are interested in other people, so that's probably not surprisingly, and people specifically who are really good at empathizing with others, and people who are better at reading the unspoken feelings and emotions of others. We introduced this at the end of the programme. We've got a very robust and reliable test, an indicator as to how good people are at empathising and putting themselves in someone else's shoes.
Yeah.
And what you tend to see is that people who are good at putting themselves into someone else's world, it's more likely that you are interested in others, and so you're more likely to pick up on some of these subtle cues and these almost nuanced behaviour, and be able to accurately interpret what's actually going on.
Right, I see. So it's more of it's a sense of sort of almost caring enough to look past what they're saying and try and look at what they're actually their body's saying.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of it goes on a subconscious level. So I just think that what we consistently see, people who score higher on this test do very, very well on accurately reading non-verbal behaviour if you provide them with, photographs, filmed images or whatever, and ask them to decode actually what's happening.
Yeah.
So they tend to be better in terms of lie detecting as well, although it's a very, very complex area. Interestingly, if you look at one thing about lie detecting that's commonly recognised, which is a polygraph, which is a conventional lie detector, what those effectively do is they seek out congruence. Your mind and your body all the time want to be the same, in the same state. And if for some reason some person wants to say something, but their body knows that it's not actually the case, that's when you're getting, it's a horrible phrase, so forgive me, you get a bit of leakage. And what happens is a lie detector is set up to pick up on moments of leakage. What it does, 2 electrodes basically, somewhere on the skin, and they measure differences and variations in moisture. And they do that by passing an electrical current. And if someone tells an untruth, what do you think happens in terms of moisture on the skin?
Does it start? Is more moisture appear, or
it does?
I see.
It does, because of they can't help but perspire a tiny little bit, and it's unrecognizable to the human eye, but galvanic skin indicator will be able to pick that up.
Yeah.
And so what happens is more electrical current can pass through, and so you get extra activity, if you like, on a meter reading.
Right.
Similarly, the heart as well. There will be an increase in sort of blood flow because of the pressure that you're putting yourself under to maintain the same composure, even though you know it's an untruth that you're saying.
Yeah.
And so both of those put together, very, very difficult, unless you're a Buddhist monk, and even then it's hard, but to actually be able to control, regardless of what you're saying orally. It doesn't actually mean I'm definitely lying.
No.
But it does put a big question mark over the validity of the response I've given, particularly if you've done some baseline behaviour first and asked me a few innocuous questions, and those always seem to give a consistent reply or a consistent way of replying.
Because that's just opened my eyes, because I see all these, because I watch so many of these. There's these sort of criminal psychology video series on YouTube, and it's really interesting the way they show the interviews with convicted serial killers in full, where they go in still upholding that they're innocent, and they come out and they've admitted to all this sort of stuff. And that now I realise now why they do. And in some instances, when they're having a polygraph test, they do start off with answers that they give questions where they know they're going to give a correct answer, or they assume they're going to give a correct answer, and then they find that varying. So in a way, that's almost a representation of understanding body language in the sense that it's your body that's telling on you. I mean, it's
absolutely
the truth about you that you're not verbally revealing yourself.
Yes, yeah, and let's face it, it's very, very easy to manipulate what you say.
Yeah,
it's too easy. So I think sometimes a much richer area to explore is what's not being said. So full listening, I think, what people who are really good in this area do is they invest as much in what's not being said or what's not being said verbally, and they look for all of the messages that are actually being relayed at the time. And so many are, our posture, the speed at which we're speaking, the pace at which we're speaking, the intonation, which words are we stressing. There's a whole host of messages that are going through beyond the words. And I think that's really full listening, and really looking at what's happening. There are things, even with the voice, which is probably one of the easier ones to manipulate, that can reveal all sorts of things going on. For example, if someone is particularly stressed or uncomfortable, and adrenaline starts to saturate their physical body, one of the first responses to that is the larynx, and it's an involuntary response, but will tighten.
Right. Okay.
And so as a result of that, you might be able to hear, but someone's voice might go up a little bit, right, in terms of an octave.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not able to control that.
No.
And so someone who is unknowingly quite good at picking up on the unspoken feelings and emotions of others may well think that normally David talks at this sort of pitch, this sort of level, but I feel he was a little uncomfortable earlier on today,
right?
When we asked him where the money was for the new TV and his contribution towards it, because suddenly what happened was this, right. And that, as I say, is really hard to do anything about. Yeah. And I think all sorts of things come out of it as well. That's why the advice for people, if they want to come across as informed, and as confident or as in control, is to talk slowly and to talk at a lower tone.
Right, I see.
And it may be unknowing to people as to why, but it makes it easier to follow, but also it gives the impression that they are relaxed, because we know one of the things that happen to people when they're not relaxed is that this is going to happen with their larynx. So there's loads, there's so many different opportunities to look at different parts of people's physiology. There's another area of body language which deals with lateral eye movements. And I think some of that's been popularized about when you ask a specific question, at that point, sometimes you can get indicators from where someone's eyes move to and in which direction, as to whether or not they're accessing visual thoughts, they're accessing auditory thoughts, or whether or not they're moving downwards for a moment and accessing feelings and recollections. Right. So there's plenty to go at.
God, yeah, that's. I mean, just in this brief chat that we've had. I mean, I knew that coming into this. It's not something I've looked into before, and I certainly am going to now because it's very interesting. But there's so many more levels to sort of understanding it and reading it, and things that you just mentioned in brief that seems so interesting to me. But in terms of the questions that I've had, you've answered all of them fantastically. I mean, I've been completely satisfied with that. So thank you very much. I was just wondering if there's anything that you wanted to add on to the end, anything that you might feel is important to know about sort of applied body language in general, or any comments that you may have. I'd love to hear them.
For someone who's casually interested in the area, there's a very accessible book actually, and it's called What Everybody Is Saying. It's an American book by a guy called Joe Navarro, and you can pick it up very, very cheaply for a few pounds. And that provides a really lovely, well illustrated book in terms of some of the things to look out for. So that's good. I would be quite wary of some of the older books. Yeah. A lot of the older books are anchored heavily in behaviorism. Right. And it was a model that was used to explain body language. And I think it's a little bit limited in that it sort of fires one bullet and hopes to answer everything with that. Okay. So it will say things like, well, if you're an aggressive person, you're going to, you're going to point more at people,
Yeah.
and you're going to, sort of intrude into their personal space,
Yeah.
and you're going to talk very quickly and loudly. And if you're passive, you're going to, want to shrink and talk quietly and avoid eye contact. So it seems to make lots of very broad generalizations.
Okay, I see.
And as a result of it, I think someone who sees one person who is maybe pointing the finger, and they'll say, oh, they were very aggressive. And it seems to be too embracing, really.
Sort of an umbrella, sort of putting everything in one sort of category kind of thing.
Exactly.
Right.
So a lot of the older books tend to do that. I'd say the most commonly held belief is right back to the beginning of our discussion, which is, and everyone always wants to know about, and this is the what do they mean by, sort of when you fold your arms? I've heard that means that you're being defensive.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I both know that maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'm very cold this afternoon.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a very comfortable position for me. It can be all sorts of reasons. However, I'd say this is the final and the key points in terms of why body language is so important. And that is, regardless of the rationale you give yourself as to why you scratch your head at certain times or do something in a particular way, it's all about the impact. Because whether or not you rationalize folding your arms as keeping yourself warm, or you once broke one of your arms when you were a child, and so it's learned behavior to support that arm. Ultimately, body language is about the impact that it has on others, not the rationale that you provide. There's research being done, and this is staggering, and it's very consistent. People who have a folded body language, so maybe folded arms, folded legs in a meeting context, regardless of the rationale that they provide to themselves for why they're doing it, on average, pick up 40% less information over the course of a day than do people with an open posture.
God,
That is
amazing.
staggering. And I think it's probably, I'm sure there's, plenty of hypothesis around this, but it's probably to do with that fact that your body and your mind seek congruence. So actually, if you're closing your body to things, for whatever reason you tell yourself, perhaps there's part of your mind that's being closed as well, because the two of them seek to be together and seek synergy.
Right.
And another thing is, part of the same research as well found that people who had closed body posture unknowingly were more likely in a meeting context to say negative things than positive things when compared to people who had an open body posture.
Right, I see.
In a consistent way.
God, that's mind blowing. It's not that I can almost, because that's what I thought you were going to say the first time. I thought you were going to say something like the people on the other end, regardless of their intention, were receiving it as negative. But that's just mind blowing. But just simply from, I mean, that just raises so many questions. Like, is it your brain telling you yourself that you don't want to be listening? Is it would you be okay to? Is there a way to access that? Is it sort of published online, that research?
I'll find it for you, and I'll send over the information. Yes, I'll drop you an email anyway, David.
Perfect.
But the whole I mean, that's the most probably blatant bit of body language that people always seem to hone in on.
Yeah.
But it's the same situation for so many of the commonly held assumptions and myths that, when you dig deeper, it becomes even more fascinating.
Yeah.
I hope I've whetted your appetite.
Honestly, you seriously have. I knew myself that I didn't know a lot, but I didn't realise the scale of it, and so many things that you can work out just from being able to read these cues and these these parts of body language. But thank you so much for this, Chris. Honestly,
you're more than welcome. I hope you can make it. What you'll be rewarded with by the end of the day is you will know just how good you are at reading other people. And if you're not, if you find out that actually you scored lower, because I think there's something about human nature, we all like to think that we're good at reading others, because we're all fascinated by human behaviour, because we are humans. But if those people that find out that maybe they're not as successful at it as they thought, we'll also provide some strategies to improve your performance.